Okay, you are set.
Okay, I call to order this May 14th, 2020 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:01 p.m. First item on the agenda is citizens to be heard. Do we have anyone summer hanging out?
I have no comments from anyone.
Okay. We did receive a comment via email on another issue, but nothing relevant to anything we're talking about tonight. So next, approval of minutes. We have several minutes to approve. We have what?
I think those were all, you shouldn't have any minutes. Or
No, I actually added them. I had to amend it because I wanted to get us caught up on the minutes. So
okay, sorry. Go ahead.
4 sets. Sorry.
We have February 13th, February 27th, April 9th, and April 23rd. Did anyone read those, find any sort of changes we need to make? Everything look good? We can entertain a motion to approve all or some of those minutes.
I can make a motion to approve those minutes.
All right, second from anyone?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor? Summer, you want us to roll call it?
Yep, give me just a sec. So Kaya?
Aye.
Becky?
I wasn't here for most of those meetings, so.
You can still vote.
Okay, I'm fine with it. Aye, I guess.
Okay. Luke?
Aye.
Marianne?
Aye.
Jess?
Aye.
Okay.
Becky, we're going to hold you personally responsible if some of those minutes said the city's buying a bounce house for the planning commission. So,
damn it.
Someone read the fine print.
Okay.
Totally kidding.
On to our first action item, 4.1, review and possible recommendation to the city council on the annexation petition submitted by Lionsback Holdings LLC for 3.21 acres located at 938 and 940 South Main Street in Moab, and further recommendations of C4 general commercial assigned zoning with that annexation. Take it away, staffers.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen with you if I can figure out how. Oh, there we go, I guess. Can you see my screen or no?
Not yet.
Oh, that's weird. Why is it doing this? Okay.
Now we can see your screen.
Yay. Okay. So, this is something, annexations are sort of a whole, sorry, allergies. Annexations are a whole kind of new and different thing for many of the planning commissioners. Those of you who have been on the planning commission for a while may have reviewed some, but many of the planning commissioners are new. So what I want to do is to kind of give a sort of a brief background on annexations and kind of how they generally work and what they are, because it's different than what we usually look at as planning commissioners. And as you can see, the applicant is Lionsback Holding, not related to the Lionsback project. Just so you know, that just happens to be the name of their company. They do have a good view of it probably, so that may be why it is. The location is just south of town at 938 and 940 South Main Street. And let me see, there we go. I know this is kind of hard to read, but this is the highway. This is the county zoning. And the parcel is actually right here. It's this parcel and this parcel. So you can see it's general business and rural residential is what the county has zoned. This is the city zoning map. And so this is a better idea of the location. It's this parcel and this parcel.
Hey,
So
Nora,
yeah,
are these images in one of the exhibits in the
Yes.
agenda?
they're in the zoning analysis, which is one of the
Exhibit
last-
7?
Yeah.
Okay, because I have another screen going, so I'm gonna pull those up. Go on.
Okay,
Thanks.
Yeah. So this is basically where the property is. And this is darker blue line are the city limits. Oops. And so this is actually part of a kind of a what we call a peninsula, which means that there is other property further down Highway 191 that is already annexed into the city. So this is kind of a finger of property that has not yet been annexed, kind of skipped over at this point in time. Especially that happened primarily when we annexed the USU campus. So all of these properties are what's considered an island. And I'll talk about it a little bit, but the way annexation law works is we're supposed to, one of our goals is to work toward eliminating those peninsulas and or islands if we have them. So as you can see, there's some commercial buildings on the property currently, and the tax roll indicates that its current use is commercial with improved commercial buildings. I don't know the status of these commercial uses, but there are some structures on the parcel. This parcel will be used for access. At this point in time, we're not reviewing the specific site plan for it. We're just taking a look at the annexation. The specific site plan, once they file an application, the Planning Commission will have an opportunity to review. So the scope of this review is only on the annexation. It's not necessarily on the project itself. And here's the plat. You can see this parcel and this parcel. It's total of about, I think it's 3.21 or 3.12 acres, 3.13, this one says, somewhere around there, 3.12, 3.13 acres. So let me talk a little bit about annexations. The guiding provisions for annexations come from two places. First and foremost is state law. And most of what our local law and most local laws in Utah do is they just kind of restate the state law. The state law are really the guiding provisions, and they tell us what we need to do. They tell us what documents we need to have adopted. They tell us basically what the criteria is. They tell us we have to provide and we have to develop an annexation policy plan. And the really specific procedures with notification requirements and very specific steps. And then we have our local code, which isn't even in the zoning chapter. It's in, I don't know, general administration or something. In the first chapter of the Moab Municipal Code. And it talks about the annexation petition itself. So just talks about what that needs to be. Annexation procedures, and that's where it talks about those steps. And then the third portion of that is actually our annexation policy plan, which has been adopted and is codified in our development code under 1.32. These are all referred to in Title 17, Chapter 17, or Title 17, but the actual, it just refers back to this section. And the policy plan was something that was done a number of years ago. It's required of every municipality, and it's in consultation with the county. And we established at that point an annexation policy plan map that says if properties within this extra jurisdictional area, so stuff outside the city limits but relatively close, if and when it develops, it should be considered whether or not to annex it into the city. It's not a requirement per se, but it says that basically urban development should occur in the city. And so that's what the annexation policy plan does. And it's developed in concert with the county. So just sort of in general on annexations, they're not just zoning actions. Really, the Planning Commission's role, which I'll talk about later, is primarily with the zoning piece. So they're much more than just zoning actions. It's one small piece of the puzzle, and the larger discussion we'll talk about further includes a whole bunch of other things like provision of services and taxing and all kinds of stuff. So the Planning Commission's role is really a fairly small piece in the big picture. In our general plan, we did show the annexation policy map. And in this land use area, it has been shown as general commercial. So the idea is that when urban development occurs, it should occur within municipalities. And this is kind of the way it's set up statewide. Counties were originally set up to provide kind of the overarching things like county sheriff, county recorder, county clerk. They deal with elections. So there's sort of some broad powers that the county, overarching powers that the county has. In general, counties are set up to provide that high level of service. And the philosophy statewide is that as an urban level of development occurs, or as development occurs adjacent to cities and towns, it should be considered for annexation into that city and town. Now, historically in Utah, there have been, well, not historically, but what's happened is that there have been a number of urban counties that the counties have taken on the role, some of the municipal type services. And Grand County is one of them, Summit County is another, Salt Lake County is one, but most of the rest of the counties really deal with just county types of services. And Salt Lake County's goal is to have all of the little pieces in between, all the little municipalities actually expanded so that it's just municipalities and there's no non-annexed county land. And they're getting there just with the development that's occurring. Where I worked for a while in New Jersey, it was entirely municipalities. So border to border in counties were municipalities. So there was no unannexed land to be developed within a county, which is again, how a lot of states view it. And that's the basis really of the zoning in Utah, or the rules in Utah. The annexation process is a negotiation really between the property owner or the petitioner and the city. And usually there is either a pre-annexation agreement and or an annexation agreement, which actually sets forth sort of the special terms of the annexation. And the city, again, it's a negotiated process. So the city has to make a decision that it's worth annexing for some reason. And then they negotiate the terms of that annexation. So the procedures, and this is right out of our code, is that petitions can be considered. And again, this state law sets forth this process as well as our code. So a petition has to be submitted to the city. The city recorder then places that petition on the city council agenda, and the city council decides whether or not they even want to entertain it or consider it. And that was done, and the city council has done that. Once that happens, then the county recorder, who is Summer, reviews the petition to make sure that it has all of the required information for an annexation petition. And again, there's a pretty lengthy list in state law and then repeated in our law. Then the city recorder reviews it and determines that it complies with the letter of the law in terms of what an annexation petition is and what it contains. So and then she publishes a notice of certification. Within 10 days of that notice of certification, a series of notices are prepared again by Summer, and a notification has to be mailed, or it has to be published in newspaper of general circulation for 3 consecutive weeks, and all of the service providers that may be involved, which would include all of our service districts, fire, water, all those folks are also specifically noted or specifically sent a copy of the certification notice. Then there's a review period, there's a protest period of 30 days from the date of certification that allows, and because it's being reviewed, it's been published in the newspaper, notice to adjoining property owners, all those things. Somebody can come in and protest it. And if you're really having trouble sleeping, you could read the state law that deals with once a protest is filed, what you do. It's really complicated, and it has a lot to do with money and formulas and economic analysis, formation of a boundary commission to review the protest, and it's quite a lengthy and complicated process. Fortunately, no protests were received within that 30 days, so we're moving forward with the annexation. So the annexation criteria, this must be met to accept an annexation. City endorses the intent of the Utah Annexation Act, and the criteria are that the property must be contiguous with the boundaries. The property must lie within the projected area of city municipal expansion. It does both those. The property must not be included in the boundaries of another incorporated municipality. The annexation must not create unincorporated islands, and this annexation actually reduces the size of an unincorporated peninsula. And the property proposed to be annexed will not be annexing for the proposed purpose of acquiring municipal revenue. And this section is really the city council's business, but what it has to do with is you can't annex a parcel just because you want the tax revenue if you're building a Walmart. That there has, it has to meet all the other criteria as well. The council, So the planning commission's role is fairly limited, and our law, which reflects state law, says upon certification of the city recorder, the petition application may be submitted to the Planning Commission for analysis and review according to the annexation policy plan and for recommendations with respect to the appropriate zoning. So it's mostly a zoning exercise. But then there's also a section that says, in order to facilitate orderly growth and development in the city, the Planning Commission may review proposed annexation, make recommendations to the City Council concerning the parcel to be annexed, the effect on city development, and the recommended zoning district designation for the proposed annex area. Reviews by the Planning Commission is not a requirement for annexation, and approval from the Planning Commission is not necessary. So you're making a recommendation, it's optional. We have chosen to bring annexations to the Planning Commission for a recommendation. We don't have to, but we just think it's better planning and everything else if we do. So there are other considerations beyond just zoning considerations that the city council has to consider in annexations, which usually takes up the bulk of the sort of negotiated items. State provisions, they have to consider populations and density, property valuations and impacts, overall impact of the project, need for municipal services, financing and time frame for extension of utilities. Sometimes that requires a phasing agreement or something. Tax consequences to residents that are already in the city, and to the folks that are within the annexation area. The decision to extend or install improvements is vested solely in the discretion of the city council. So that's where they get the power, actually, in annexations. And then they have to consider community character. So this particular petition was received on February 5th. City council agreed to consider the annexation shortly thereafter. The city recorder reviewed the petition and issued the certification on March 25th, 2020. It's been published, so that should be for 3 consecutive weeks. The protest period has passed. The extra step that happened in this case, and that happens, my understanding is with most petitions that happen to Moab, is there's a pre-annexation agreement that's entered into. And Joel, as city manager, really likes to use pre-annexation agreements as a tool. And basically what it is it's an agreement between the petitioner and the city council or the city that says, we're not saying we're going to annex, but if you end up getting annexed, you have agreed to these additional conditions that are placed on your property. Usually they're above and beyond what would otherwise be required. So that's an important step in this case. So these are the kinds of things that are usually covered in a pre-annexation agreement. The zoning, obviously, and then specific, the pre-annexation agreement included specific project standards, and I've included all the ones that are shown. And what the pre-annexation agreement says is that, and the reason it says it is that we have been in the process of adopting new development standards for overnight accommodations. What's being proposed on this site is the hotel. And what they have agreed to do is meet at least the intent of those draft provisions that we were working on. So the pre-annexation agreement, which was primarily drafted, it was probably offered up by them, but it was based on the draft overnight accommodation standards that we were looking at and are still looking at. So they have agreed to kind of further restrict their development to include the energy items, water conservation, transportation, building design, materials and colors, interior and exterior lighting, and workforce housing. So they will have to comply with all the standards as they are agreed to in the pre-annexation agreement. Energy, they basically agree to provide as much energy as electricity as they can on site, and that the balance will be purchased from green energy credits programs. The water, it's basically the same language that we have in the draft overnight accommodations. Energy, they also are required to put in EV stations for cars. Water, they're required, limited lawn, water conserving landscaping, no more than 10% turf. So it's all those kinds of things that we talked about as part of the overnight accommodations discussion. Transportation primarily has to do with making sure there's room for a shuttle. They've agreed to some bicycle storage and rental. Building design, materials and colors, again, that all is right out of the draft annexation agreement language. And they're designed to create just a more interesting building. Interior lighting, we've had some concerns about hotels who in effect become lanterns. And the hoodoo, that was an issue with the hoodoo initially. I think we've resolved some of that with them, but they agree to make sure that there's not lights that point outward that make it really a beacon. There are beacons on the hill, but this does not want to be one. Dark skies, and that's mostly exterior lighting. They've agreed to comply with, and then they will be required to participate in the required workforce housing according to our Wahoo ordinance, where they could either pay a fee in lieu or build. So this is a criteria that I just showed before, and our response. So the property meets these criteria. And the Planning Commission has a number of options. I have prepared a Planning Commission resolution which recommends approval to the City Council based upon findings and condition, and incorporates the development standards of the pre-annexation agreement. So you can certainly make that recommendation to the City Council to approve it. You can continue action and provide specific guidance to the staff. What additional information do you need to make a decision? Or you can forward a negative recommendation to the council and recommend that they not annex this piece of property. If you choose to go that way, you'll need to come up with some criteria as to why you recommend denial. Now, I know most folks are going, well, I thought we had a moratorium on hotels and motels and lodging. Well, we do. This particular application, I want to go up here. This particular annexation was in the works with the county. They actually have an active application with the county. And there have been a lot of discussions. There had been some financial reliance. And so the thought was that there was some legal concerns with it. And I think it's for that reason that we are considering this annexation at this point in time. And there's a lot involved there that primarily the City Council has to consider. But they did accept the annexation petition for review.
I have a question. So
Yes.
At the time of the temporary lodging restriction, would they have qualified as an in-process overnight accommodation in the county? Did they?
No, not initially. I think in one of their, well, it's not in the city numbers. I think it may be in the county pending numbers. So it may have been included in those counting pending numbers, but I couldn't swear to it. They did not have a complete application on file with the county or the city. And they did, after that, they filed an application with the county. But there have been negotiations with the city, so they're trying to annex rather than go through the county.
And can you
with that, looking at recitals B, and that statement may not be a true statement. Grand County Land Use Code 2.9 makes it clear that a hotel or a motel is a use that's permitted by right. And that's as of November 2019.
Where are you looking at, Marianne? Sorry.
Yeah, where are you looking at?
I'm looking at document 2211.
Oh, the pre-annexation agreement?
Yeah.
It's the pre-annexation agreement.
Oh, the pre-annexation agreement. Oh, I have that somewhere.
Yeah, that was my confusion a little bit too, saying it's identified as an approved OAO district, but that is not under the county's new OAO districts, correct?
My understanding is that it's in an area that you could ask for the OAO. It has not been specifically applied Let me look at the pre-annexation agreement here if I can find
I
it.
think that's a big difference.
It is.
The language that's used in the recital is not, or what it's not saying that. It's actually implying that it's a use by right. And it's also implying that if it were brought into Moab City, it would also be a use by right. And I think that's a very dangerous condition for us to enter into.
Again, this agreement has actually already been approved.
Yeah,
and-
that's the
and
city's
executed.
voted on agreement.
So, and our attorney wrote this. I was really not privy to any of this. So you certainly have a right to disagree. And, you know, if the planning commission is uncomfortable with this, you can certainly forward a negative recommendation. It is unusual. And we hope not to see any more of these.
No, I agree with Marion. I think that's the way that is phrased is technically incorrect, but this is a document, an agreement that has been entered into by the city council
Right.
with the property owners already. So whether or not that is correct, I mean, I don't know that it would be within our, yeah, there's nothing we can do about that. We're not a legislative body.
But if you decide to make a negative recommendation to the city council, you can certainly put that in your findings. That you find that the recital B in the pre-annexation agreement is not correct. It is an incorrect assumption, and that could be one of your findings. If you decide to go that way.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to entertain annexations if the conditions are all met and they're all correct. This, however, looks like it has a few problems that we're not comfortable going through with.
For example?
For example, the assumptions that are made in the recital document.
Okay. So
So
is the
that-
pre-annexation agreement,
Sorry, who said that?
so the pre-annexation agreement, the provisions of the pre-annexation agreement is primarily what you're opposed to. Yeah.
An assumption that the pre-annexation agreement seems to be predicated on, we are discussing potentially is, I think, based on very limited reading of it, yes, that would not have been the case. What being able to ask for overnight accommodation designation is not a use by right. I think that was the county's whole point in writing it that way. It's that it's not a use by right. It's you essentially have the ability to ask for a legislative designation every time, right?
Yes. Let me share my screen again. Maybe I can find.
I think regardless of what we do, this is something that it will be kicked to the city council. I know it was a split vote last time and that the mayor was the tie-breaking vote in approving
That is correct.
the annexation agreement.
Yep.
The city council is still going to need to make this determination regardless of what our recommendation is. And I do think it might be useful, prudent, and make the most sense for city council to open that discussion amongst themselves again, kind of having all of that knowledge in mind right now. I certainly understand why the city manager and the city attorney want to do pre-annexation agreements. It makes a ton of sense. But I imagine city council might like an opportunity to review this again.
Well, they have to.
Yeah.
They absolutely have to. I mean, because they have to adopt an annexation by ordinance. And the ordinance usually is fairly lengthy and then often has an annexation agreement attached to it. So.
I mean, if I were city council, what would make the most sense to me would be to do some sort of compromise where you're allowing the annexation subject on that one parcel to the same exact thing that the county has in place right now, where the property owner is able to make the presentation to the relevant legislative body to make that decision on a parcel by parcel basis, because that's certainly what it is now.
Yes.
So it would essentially be giving them the benefit of the bargain that they've entered into with the county, with the county's new overnight accommodation rules and designations.
Correct.
I don't know how we would make that recommendation to city council other than not recommending approval and suggesting that. So just something to think about. That seems to be what, I mean, the idea of an annexation is that both the city and the property owner get something out of it, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I imagine regardless of what we say, city council is going to have their own completely separate discussion on this and decision.
And I suspect it will be robust.
Yes.
They also have to have a public hearing.
Yes. So I guess all of that to say, no pressure on planning commission, I think, depending on what we choose. I think this discussion is likely going to be helpful. Nora's explanation, certainly, and I hope the city council watches this meeting to kind of review what's going on here, but I think.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a slippery slope if you include the recital as part of any change that city council would make. They might even wait until we redo the hotel overnight accommodation zoning and then apply for annexation. That might be the proper way to do this.
That would be the other option. And we had sort of hoped that we'd have that in place, but we don't.
It's
It's
Where
just,
you said criteria D was to make it so there were not islands, but wouldn't this create an island that's completely surrounded by city?
All right, let's go back to that map. Okay.
it would. Because this is Roy's Auto, right? That's the property we're talking about. Yeah, that would put Farm City and the Community Credit Union and Moab side by side would be an island of county property.
It's across the street from other county property though. So it actually becomes, it just makes, it reconfigures the peninsula in a different way.
Yeah.
But the road is considered city because the road's colored purple in this diagram.
Well, and all this is that's in the county as well. This big chunk of property.
Isn't it the city's goal to annex everything in out campus, or wasn't there something done in the recent years to annex in property out there?
To the south, well, yes, the USU annexation.
Okay, so you annexed that site then.
I'm sorry?
The city annexed that parcel into, okay, so it would make sense to continue down to that.
Yeah, I think that was sort of the long-term vision. Certainly the USU wanted to use some of our municipal resources and so on. So they wanted to annex into the city, and it was ultimately annexed. We've had several annexations on the north end, like all the RV parks and all that was annexed after they were either developed or approved. And the best, if development is going to occur, it's sometimes in the city's best interest to develop it in the city. So again, we would benefit from sales tax revenue and some of the tax revenue things. And of course, that can't be the only requirement. The other thing it does is that these folks will have to pay city impact fees, which will help our system. If it's developed in the county, I don't even know if the county has impact fees, but we won't get them. So anything related to the fact that our police are here all the time and some of those kinds of things, we do try to collect impact fees to offset some of the impact of development on our city systems.
Yeah, and things like water and sewer and all of that are lower in the city than they are in the county. So I think that's a big incentive for annexation on the part of the property owner too.
Lower, you mean in cost?
in cost.
Yeah.
It's cheaper as a city resident to hook into city than it is as a county person to hook into city.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pre-annexation agreement makes sense. It is clear that council's intent, at least initially with the members that were there that voted then, was to allow everything that they set out in the pre-annexation agreement. I do think item B in the pre-annexation agreement is a pretty big misstatement of how things actually were. And I'm very curious if the yay votes were predicated on the understanding that this was a use by right, or the thought that this was a use by right. I don't know that. I didn't attend that meeting or watch it, but it might make sense if you're thinking, oh, you already have the absolute right to do this in the county, so it would make sense for us to carry this over into the city, if that was city council's thought.
I think the council is very familiar with the county zoning and what they ultimately adopted.
Okay.
So, and that's sort of, so I think that they were aware of the exact situation.
Okay.
Whether or not the recital is, in your opinion, correct or not, you know, it, yeah.
All right. So
I mean,
that,
they're willing to comply with what we've set, what we've talked. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi is up. So I thought maybe you were talking. If they're willing to comply with the standards we've been discussing, I mean, why not bring the tax revenue into the city? I understand what Mary Ann's saying, where we don't have that really set in stone yet. Is it possible to make it contingent upon that final definition before a building permit's issued or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the pre-annexation agreement and the annexation agreement will do, and the ordinance that adopts the annexation. It will say it's to these terms, and it will either reiterate it or it will refer to the pre-annexation agreement. So I just shared, can you guys see it? The standards, this is the resolution. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay. General business. So as a general business property, it is, that's hotels and hotels wasn't allowed use before the moratorium and the modification of the zoning. And I understand that this is different because they actually have to apply that the overlay be applied to this particular parcel, and they have not gone through that step yet. But these are, so the standards are similar. Energy is actually a little bit more defined than what we've been looking at in some ways. And it talks about as much on-site renewable energy sources as feasible. So there's not a minimum, but there's just a commitment to use as much as possible, and then the rest would be provided with renewable power purchase credits. The project agrees to high performance exterior envelope methods. That's above and beyond what we were talking about. The thermal envelope, electric vehicle charging stations is in our standards, and daylighting for common areas and public spaces. That's above and beyond what we were considering. The water in the pre-annexation agreement is exactly, almost exactly what we were proposed, but they added the project will utilize dual flush toilets. Transportation, this is what we recommended in our development standards of what the county adopted. Building design, this is basically each 30, this is basically what we were recommending and what the county adopted. Materials and colors, this is much more specific than we recommended. Interior lighting, this is just that sort of extra commitment. Exterior lighting, they've agreed to the Moab Dark Skies ordinance, which they'd have to do anyway if they develop in the city and the county. And then workforce housing, they've agreed to comply.
Just
So
mention, can I ask a question, Nora?
Yeah.
So would this pretty much let them build a hotel, although it wouldn't let anyone else in the C4 build a hotel?
Yes.
I don't think that's a very good idea right now.
And I don't know, the city council could certainly add something that says, or you could ask that the council add something that says that this looks fine, but we won't actually approve it as a site plan until we adopt our OAO requirements. I don't think that that's what the petitioner is looking for, but that's certainly something that you could recommend. All of the, in general, the standards that we're proposing have been satisfied, except for the energy conservation one is a little different, but we have realized that what we propose is not realistic, and we're looking at revising that anyway.
Yes. And we could make a positive recommendation to the city council with that on the recommendation, recommending that the city revisit this come site plan approval, or I don't know how we would phrase that, Nora.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that they do have an active application with the county, which could certainly move forward. They'd have to designate the OAO on this site, which is probably not outside the realm possibility. And then they basically meet the criteria. Mm-hmm. So,
I mean, there is a signed agreement with the city council with vested rights quite clear in it. So I am not inclined to go against that, knowing that city council is going to still have this discussion either way. It's a weird situation. I agree with Marianne that, slippery slopes are slippery slopes, and we don't want to basically let various property owners flout the rules when others couldn't do that, because it does, I think, open the door, because I think especially in a small community, the, well, they were able to do this, why can't I argument goes a long way.
yeah.
But
I think the argument is, so I see this vested rights section. Mm-hmm. So the assumption is that
we can't overdo that as a planning commission.
Right. And that before the moratorium, they could have come in and built and annexed and built. So I think and even what the recital says up further. So I think what is being looked at is the fact that they were somehow vested for review under the old rules. But anyway, that's not really here nor there.
We can entertain a motion for something. We have a variety of options. We can, let me pull up the agenda sheet. I'm losing track of everything. We can recommend that City Council approve the annexation consistent with the pre-annexation agreement. We can continue this item for specific guidance necessary. We need to make a decision. We can recommend the City Council not annex this property with findings as to why the Planning Commission is recommending denial, or a fourth option, we could recommend approval of this annexation consistent with the pre-annexation agreement, with the additional recommendation that potentially City Council wait for site plan approval until there are some form of city OA regulations in place. Design features, even though I personally, I'm quite comfortable with what is in the pre-annexation agreement as far as design features goes. It does go in excess of likely what we're going to end up with at the end of the day. So that's an added benefit, but yeah, it's a weird situation. So variety of options if anyone feels strongly, so we can entertain a motion for any of those. If we get a second, we can then have further discussion on that before voting.
So you're basically doing one with conditions.
Yeah, you could.
Whatever. Yeah.
I'd like to motion to have a negative recommendation to City Council recommending this. So I would motion not to recommend this proposal, just based on inconsistent positions in our current zoning law.
Okay, Marianne has recommended that the city council not annex this property. Does anyone second that? Okay, I think motion fails for lack of a second. Any other recommendations?
I mean, we're almost done with RC and C4, are we not?
We're getting there. The real, there's still some tweaks, but we're not that far off.
Can't we motion to approve it with, final comparison of what we end up passing or the city council passes for the OAO zone? I mean, I don't think this is a negative thing. It's going to bring revenue into the city. It's going to fund the assured housing or provide more housing. I just think it needs to match whatever we end up deciding on, which I don't think we're far off.
Yeah, I agree.
How about this for what that recommendation could look like? It could be recommended for annexation subject to, is there something we could do with timing, Nora, where if the site plan is not prepared prior to city council's approval of new C4 overnight accommodations regulations, this must meet at minimum those new anything. I'm just wondering how to phrase that.
So do you
Just saying,
want
do a side-by-side comparison if this doesn't predate when those new regulations are finally in place. So if this happens before, it's subject to everything that's in the site plan agreement. If it happens after the new OA accommodations regulations are in place, for anything that it would be under the threshold set by those new overnight accommodations recommendations, it needs to go up to that threshold. It's essentially a timing question, right? We want to make sure that if there is not a site plan ready and approved by when we get new OA regulations in place, it needs to comply with those OA regulations.
Okay.
Being a special case, whereas something that truly is an existing overnight accommodation right now on our zoning map would not have to.
Right.
Does that make sense to everyone? I have absolutely no idea how to phrase that, but.
We could motion just conditional on future C4 zoning law changes and not include anything about the assumptions that they are allowed to build a hotel right now. Can't we just rezone the lot and wait for those to change just like everybody else is waiting?
That's an option.
What would that look like, Marianne? Sorry, I'm confused a little.
Well, we can recommend removing any language that assumes that the applicant will be approved for a hotel upon annexation.
I do not believe we can do that because of the pre-annexation agreement. And that's just me, and others might disagree. Okay, I will motion recommending that the city council approve the annexation and zoning designation of C4 to the city council consistent with the pre-annexation agreement. Also recommending the additional condition that the developer comply with future C4 overnight accommodations regulations if they are finalized prior to site plan approval. I think that captures it.
Those standards are finalized.
Yes.
Okay.
I think you're still on a slippery slope based on the recitals.
So I've made a motion. If there's a second, it would be the time for that.
I second the motion.
Okay, motion and a second. Any discussion, Marianne?
Yeah, I still think that based on the recitals, you're not able to make any changes on that legally. So yeah.
Any other discussion? Okay, we'll call for a vote on that motion. Summer,
Yep.
still there?
Jess?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
Kaya?
Yes.
Becky?
Yes.
Marianne?
No.
Okay. Motion
Motion passes 4-1.
4-1.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
This
thanks
is
for
just as
talking
a-
that out with us.
I'm sorry.
I was just saying thank you, Nora, for talking that out with us. It's a weird situation.
It is very
Yeah.
weird. And Nora, you had a great presentation. This one is strange.
It's got factors that are way above my pay grade that, whatever.
Mine too.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be, as you said, a robust discussion at city council level. I am decently certain.
Yeah. And we have gotten several new inquiries for potential annexations in the last couple of weeks. I don't know why. Maybe there's no, I don't know. But we have. And so we will probably likely be seeing more of these. More annexations, not ones that are this weird. The annexations that we're talking about would have to follow all the rules and don't have any vesting and all that. Well, one of them does, the other one doesn't, but.
Will you let us know when Joel writes another pre-annexation agreement so we can look at it before it's finalized? Because I feel like that would also be helpful.
Yeah, Joel and Lori put it together. And so, yeah.
If it makes
Certainly.
any of you feel any better, I'm pretty sure Nora and I knew nothing about it.
We
It
didn't.
was kind of showed up.
I suppose we should just pay more attention to city council, huh? We're always kvetching about them not paying attention to what we do at our meetings. Maybe we should do the same thing.
Even prior to that, it was just, it was a surprise.
Mhm.
Yes, it was. But again, cities annex for all kinds of reasons. And sometimes we can't always understand all of at least I can't always understand all the reasons that the city might do it because it involves so much more than planning.
Yeah.
Nora, thank you again. That presentation was awesome.
But I do think it's worth saying that the public should know those reasons to the best of their ability because so much gets confused. And if there is a good reason, I don't see why that isn't something that's super forthright at public meetings too. I think that's really important. Just a note for the city.
Okay.
Hey, let me go back to my agenda here. Okay, so that was action item 4. Number 5, Planning Commission work session on overnight accommodations in the RC zone.
I really have nothing.
Okay, that's fine.
I haven't had, last week and this week, I figured I'd get some together by the beginning of the week, but last week and this week have just been really, really, really busy. So I apologize for that and I will start working on it.
And then any future agenda items, you mentioned a few other annexations. I know we've got Henry Shaw stuff still coming or.
Yes. And I think, you guys looked at it once and said we wanted to wait until we figured out employee workforce housing and we haven't figured that out yet. Again, several things have kind of been put on hold just because of our other priorities in the city. The city council meeting on Tuesday was very interesting. And if you have an opportunity to watch the city council meeting, particularly the part that talks about the budget, it would be really good for you to hear that presentation, because we're in big trouble financially. And this has nothing to do with the Planning Commission, but we're going to have to cut like 3 million more out of our budget. And so we're sort of consumed with trying to figure out how we're going to do that and how we're going to reopen and all that stuff. So things have been really busy on other fronts.
Yeah.
Future agenda item as well, throw that in there, is that we have had contact with Jim Nelson with the Nelson Court rezone that you guys had reviewed and then continued. Jim is working with the surveyor and he should have that survey complete by the end of the month. So hopefully into the beginning of June, that might be coming back to you guys.
Other than that, there's nothing really huge on the horizon. Lions back, we're likely to see again. They did the court. I think the Utah Supreme Court refused to hear it. And I don't know the details on it. I'll try to get Lori to write something up. But my understanding is that then the appellate court decision stands, which the decision was that I think that it was a major revision that should have gone back to the Planning Commission.
Yep.
So you'll likely see that before too long. That'll be fun.
All right. I will adjourn.
Great. Go out and enjoy the rest of a beautiful day.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Summer. Thanks, Nora.
Thanks, Summer.
I just
Thank
want to
you.
thank you guys. You guys have a really tough job and you guys are rock stars. So thank you for your dedication. We appreciate you.
Yes, indeed.
You guys.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Good night.
Right.